Hello, so I think we've just gone live. So welcome to this Legal 500 webinar, Sustainability and Business in Central America, the role of the in-house lawyers, perspectives and opportunities. My name is Anna Balbach. I'll be moderating the panel session today. I've been at the Legal 500 for about a decade, and among other roles, I'm currently the editor of one of our newest products, which is the Global Green Guide, which focuses on the legal sector's contribution to a green transition. So all things climate change, sustainability and ESG, which is why I'm particularly pleased to be moderating this webinar today, because we're actually currently researching the Latin America Green Guide. So quick plug to go check that out if you haven't already, and if you still want to submit for that, do get in touch. But so today's topic is, we're talking about specifically about the Central American region, which is one that actually only produces a minimal portion of global greenhouse gas emissions, but it's been classified as highly vulnerable to climate risk. So countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and El Salvador are among the places that are hit hardest by climate change. So these effects of climate change, of course, then are forcing companies to work both preventatively in the mitigation of impacts, but also proactively in the implementation of adaptation strategies. So in short, basically what this means is that companies are increasingly subject to regulations with respect to the right of use, for instance, of water resources, or also some other environmental protection measures. And these regulations, both the rights and the duties that arise from them, impact the work of companies and therefore also the work carried out by in-house counsel. And this is why we're here today for today's sessions, that we thought we'd really kind of look at that. Specifically, we'll be kind of focusing on three themes, I guess. The first one will be how legal departments can use new regulations as tools for the sustainable development of their companies. Then we'll kind of start looking a little bit more at maybe some of the legal limitations that affect the sustainable development of different industries. And then lastly, we really want to have a closer look at the actual role of the GC, or also at a lawyer in private practice, to ensure that there are better regulations towards sustainability. So we'll be hearing both from private practice and from the in-house perspective. So I'd like to maybe go ahead and introduce all the speakers. So from private practice, in fact, our sponsors from Arias Law, we have with us today Roberto Cordero. He is based in Costa Rica, where he is a partner who heads the Department of Environmental Law and Occupational Health and Safety and Food Safety, as well as ESG. And he's got more than 20 years of experience advising corporate clients and public institutions, as well as NGOs, both in Central America and South America, on environmental legal matters, occupational health and safety, including, of course, this topic of sustainability as actually the correct way to do business. He also works as an expert auditor in legal and environmental management assessments, occupational health, food safety, social responsibility, and also quality based on ISO standards. Since 2015, he's actually also been the advisor to the Chamber of Pineapple Producers in Costa Rica, and also the coordinator of the Environmental and Sustainability Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce in Costa Rica. He's also a member of the Environmental Commission of the Costa Rican Bar Association and of the Technical Committee for the review of the regulations for the evaluation and classification of the quality of surface water bodies in Costa Rica. So also some water law expertise there. And I think he's just going to be very well placed in sharing his views on sustainability and business in the Central American region. So welcome, Roberto, and thank you for joining us today. Also with us from Arias Law, but in El Salvador, we've got Carolina Lazo, who initially focused her practice in real estate law as a legal advisor and assistant to the real estate registry. Back then, she was also an assistant and then a professor at the Universidad de Dr. José Matías Delgado for Roman law, civil law, and introduction to law. And before joining Arias, she worked as a legal analyst in research at the Department of Legal Studies of the Salvadorian Foundation for Economic and Social Development, which is a Salvadoran think tank. In her legal practice, she's worked in investment projects in the textile and manufacturing sector, representing multinational companies in free zone regime, environmental law, energy, corporate, registry, regulatory compliance, and many other legal subjects related to their operations. And she's also advised various industries on contracts for the sale and supply of energy. So in the energy market in general, advice from a regulatory perspective on the establishment and operation of electrical installations associated with the generation and distribution of power. So thank you also to you, Carolina, for joining the discussion today, and we look forward to hearing from you also. And then from the in-house perspective, we'll be hearing from LIGIA GONZALEZ, who's a senior attorney at Cargill. She focuses on addressing environmental legal issues for Central America as well as Mexico. She's actually part of Cargill's global environment and sustainability team. And while she started off at Cargill in Honduras in 2004, she's then moved to Nicaragua in 2005. And she has done all sorts of things, for example, like participating in company acquisition projects for general legal matters, environmental matters in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Colombia, including also obtaining the very first concentration authorization granted in Nicaragua. So hello, welcome, and thank you to LIGIA. And then last but not least, with us is also Maria Fernanda ESQUIVEL. She's also based in Costa Rica and working there as a business legal partner for the energy group of Corporación Multiinversiones. She's also got 20 years of experience in the field of sustainability and energy markets, and has been part of teams that aim at decarbonizing the energy matrix in Central American countries and also the Caribbean. She's been involved in arbitration and litigation, project financing, M&A, regulatory challenges, and it's also been quite proactive counseling in the very disruptive energy field. She was actually appointed as the very first woman taking on the role as controller for the Costa Rican Private Generation Association, ACOPE. And more recently, she's had a very active role in a successful green bond issuance for $700 million by CMI Capital for the refinancing of their portfolio in Central America and the Caribbean, but hopefully she'll be able to tell us a bit more about that just now. So yeah, thank you very much again to all the speakers for joining today. Of course, thank you also to our audience for tuning in such high numbers. And I think without further ado, let's start with our discussion. Yeah, as mentioned, I think the first kind of question we wanted to look at is really how legal departments can use new regulations as tools for sustainable development of their companies. So we'd like to hear sort of about your experience with these regulations, maybe some of the benefits and also some of the challenges. Should we maybe start with you, Maria Fernanda? Because I think you've got this very concrete example of sustainable development. You were involved in this in what I think was the largest green bond issuance in Central America and the Caribbean. It was a very innovative transaction by CMI Energía, which is actually one of the largest renewable energy businesses in Latin America, focusing on wind, solar, and hydro technologies. So yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit more about that, given that it was a successful transaction and also that one that has had a positive impact for the environment and also for communities.
Of course. Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you to Legal 500 for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be sharing this time with these special speakers. So thank you very much. And of course, I mean, we feel very honored of having been the first largest green bond issuance in Central American Caribbean. It was a great experience. It was quite challenging, as you could suspect. We were testing the waters, and fortunately, it all worked very well. I think that most of the challenges, of course, had to do with involving 6 different jurisdictions where we have our assets. So we had quite of an opportunity to be close to the legal frameworks regarding sustainability of all of these countries in Central America. And of course, what we perceive are differences, right? It's very important difference that we have in all of these countries, that provide challenging times, but at the same time, quite an opportunity to understand and improve those legal frameworks at some point. We experience like very rewarding experiences working with many law firms. At the end, we work with 20 law firms, both from the CMI side as well as the banks, because we have project finance initially. So we went forward and pay off those project financing. So it was very, very, very interesting. And I guess that regarding your first question in terms of the legal framework, what I noticed particularly in this experience of the green bond is that when we were drafting the offering memorandum, where we are supposed to be detailing all of the risks that are being challenged, that are challenges for all of jurisdictions, you would think that those strongest legal, that the countries with the strongest legal frameworks will be the ones placing, I guess, the most risks. However, what we perceived was that on the opposite, the countries where those regulations were not as strict or as detailed were the countries where we had the most flagging of those risks because of uncertainty, right? So I guess it's natural that in those countries where we don't have those strong legal frameworks, we're gonna face more uncertainty moving forward with new businesses and continuation of our business itself. So yeah, I mean, it was quite an experience. It was a 700 million bond issuance, and then at the same time, we negotiated a 300 million syndicated loan. So at the end, I guess what we feel is very proud and very motivated to get other companies trying, the same path and feel secure that this is something that works out and that works for the Central America region.
Great, thank you, Maria Fernanda. So I think just also kind of now more generally, apart from this obviously very successful example, what's been your experience with work in terms of sustainability regulation? Obviously, you're based in Costa Rica. Costa Rica has a lot of very strong regulations towards sustainable development. I think in general, sort of its environmental credentials are seen as quite impressive, but how does this actually play out in practice?
Well, as you all know, thankfully, Costa Rica is being perceived as this country, like this green country with all of this great protection towards environment. And I think it's a well-deserved tag right on the country, because there has been a lot of work put into that. Nevertheless, I believe that sometimes the more is not the merrier. And what I mean with that is that not necessarily having all of these hundreds of laws would necessarily guarantee options for future investments and for future opportunities. So for instance, we do have many laws regulating environmental aspects and climate change regulations and policies. However, we're living in such a disruptive times that sometimes we're not ahead, right, of the change. So what I think it will be the challenge in Costa Rica is trying to move forward and be a little bit of proactive, having more proactive criteria and trying to influence those changes in policy that would, open more opportunities for investment. Let's say in Costa Rica, we have 97% of our energy matrix is renewable, right? However, our carbon emissions are pretty significant due to mostly transportation. And transportation is an urgent need for electric cars, right? And for that, we need more energy. So I think there's a lot of space that we can work on. For instance, there's a lot of opportunities in terms of hydrogen, a lot of opportunities in terms of being able to import and export energy outside and inside Costa Rica, but making sure that that energy comes from renewable energy, right? I mean, at least for CMI, we are very committed towards putting our footprint in the countries in which, in a very responsible way, and having very clear the commitments that we have as countries and as companies towards targets of COP26 as well. So I think there's a lot of work to do, but we have done a great work so far. So I think it's just a matter of getting together and working towards having, those opportunities for new business and investment.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. So maybe should we hear from Luli here? I think you've had experience sort of particularly with also juggling sort of different and changing regulations across various different countries in Central America as well. What are your thoughts in terms of kind of comparison of these regulations in different jurisdictions? And yeah, what are some of the benefits and challenges you've maybe come across?
Sure, Anna, and thank you for the invitation to Legal 500 and Arias. I think Maria Fernanda raised an interesting point when she said that more laws don't necessarily guarantee a better outlook. And I want to take water, for instance, which is a natural resource that is subject to many protections, as it should be, and to many regulations, different regulations between the countries. And you have, it is also a critical component to some of the industries, in particularly to the food processing industry. So you have regulations in the countries that you have to comply with, and you also have metrics that the companies establish for their sustainability goals. But you also need this resource for your production. So you have that dynamic that you have to balance. And we have countries with regulations that are very technical and authorities that are very technical in their work, such as Costa Rica. And then you have countries that are moving forward with new regulations, such as Honduras and Costa Rica as well, where you don't necessarily have the clarity of how this regulation is going to be applied. In Honduras, for example, we have new regulation that establishes new obligations for the users, but we don't yet have the authority that is going to work with those regulations and look after compliance. So there's a gap that companies have to live with, a gray zone where we are right now, because the regulations are in force. So right now you have a bit of a pause where companies say, I need to do this, I need to comply with this, and this requires investment, for example, but you don't have your counterpart. You don't have the government authorities to accompany you on that trip and to clarify any questions that you might have. You also have, in the case of Costa Rica, if we're thinking about both about sustainability and investment, you have authorities that, although they're very technical and very approachable when you have questions, they have in some instances, made decisions that have an impact for the companies. For example, they have reduced water usage in half for some of the permits that you have, and those decisions have a real impact into projects and investment projects that companies have. So although we have good regulations in Costa Rica and a lot of regulations, there is still a gap between the number of regulations and the clarity of the regulations that you have and the authorities that you have to work with.
Great, thank you, Ligia. I think just also because you kind of took this example of water regulation, I think Roberto, Carolina, I think that's sort of also one of your many special areas of expertise. Maybe over to you. What do you think about that? What's your view?
Good morning to everybody, and thank you for this excellent experience. I think it's very important not only to recognize what Maria Fernanda pointed out on the limitations for the use of renewable sources, especially in the private sector, and the challenge that it was for CMI to obtain this excellent goal of the green bonds. But as Ligia pointed out, and in regards to your question on water resources, I think the limitations and the regulations are set up in Costa Rica in a way that you will have technical decisions to come at the end, and you will have technical standards to comply with, but the limitations and the outcome would be better if it was taken in consideration not only sustainable goal, but economic and social continuity of some of these enterprises and some of these activities that are being performed in Costa Rica with sustainable goals. Since some of these companies not only target the legislation and the regulations that they must comply with, but they also target as CMI and as Cargill, their sustainable goals in regards to the social and the business impact that they have in our countries. And I think our governments have to see the region as a unit. And I think the experience of both the previous panelists is very rich to understand the complexity that sustainable issues might have on regards to these regulations. And I think the regulations, and especially Carolina can explain it more, that it's been brought up in El Salvador, it's a clear example where there was public participation and there were public hearings and the possibility of community to get involved, but there's still some lack of technical knowledge to set in place, as the example that Ligia pointed out in the Honduras legal framework. And I think that is very clear in the effort that CMI performed in the broad spectrum of the whole Central American area. So I think we have a very high goal to obtain. I think some countries have the structure to obtain it, as Costa Rica, to be very enforced on the use of water. But as we might talk later on, how this money is invested in sustainable issues is also a Pandora box for our Central America region. So I think it's very interesting to set up this discussion in this sense, but I think Carolina can go further into explaining what is happening in El Salvador to see the two steps behind and how this is targeting one of the most important and commercial countries, as Honduras and El Salvador are catching up to Guatemala and Costa Rica's exports and income. So I think that set up a good discussion.
Carolina, I think that was definitely your cue. Go for it.
Okay, no, thanks. And yes, you know, in El Salvador, I have been seeing that water regulations are changing. I will say that for at least, you know, the last 3 years. In 2019, we had changes in wastewater regulations when there were, now what happened is that there were 2 regulations that were issued in 2019. One was a technical regulation where the new thing was that it incorporated residual sludge that was not included before. So these 2 regulations replaced the previous one with this new addition of sludge, okay? So now the thing is, and it, you know, it takes me back to the comment that Ligia was making, that actually these 2 regulations are very similar. One is very technical because it sets the parameters that must be met by certain industries in order to, you know, to be in compliance with their wastewater. But we also have another regulation which is on the same matter. It's very similar, only that the difference is that it aims to develop those provisions in the environmental law that are related to wastewater. But when you read them, they are very much, you know, like the same basically. So sometimes, yes, I mean, it tends to be like over-regulation on certain matters, okay? But the good thing in what happened in 2019 was that these 2 regulations were the result of a process that incorporated comments from industry and from other, participants from universities, from NGOs. So when you have that exercise, you are able to have a regulation that at least it won't be a surprise for you. You will be already familiar, and it will incorporate the input from those that will obey or that will apply the law. Okay, so that is something that we have in El Salvador, at least for technical regulations, where we have that process where the draft of the regulation is made available to the public so that they can participate to provide comments. And you can also see that with certain regulations that aim to develop certain laws. Okay, so for example, we have that right now with the waste management law, where there's a regulation that will develop the law. And right now it's in a draft, but you have the possibility to present comments. And sometimes what happens is the authorities, they lack like that knowledge from a practice perspective, and and the expertise from the people that is in the industries. So that input is very important when you're working in the elaboration of these regulations. So that is something that happened with wastewater. Okay, now more recently, in June last year, there was a new process to approve a water law. The name is Ley General de Recursos Hídricos, or General Law on Water Resources. Okay, so what it was interesting here is that this law, there was a lot of expectation, because at least for the last 10 years, many drafts of laws have been reviewed in the Congress, but at some point things got too political, and so the process didn't finish. So in June last year, the government filed a new draft of the law. The Congress created an ad hoc commission, and they made a process where they opened the comments from the public. They invited certain universities and certain NGOs and also industries to participate in public hearings, where you came with the law or your comments and your analysis, and you provided those comments to the Congress people. So that was a very interesting exercise, because we were able to work as a regional law firm. It was very interesting, because we were able to make a comparison of regulation on certain aspects that were then provided to the Congress, and also legal analysis. Also, we made also an analysis of those provisions that could duplicate in other laws, in order, to provide more clarity and to avoid having so many regulations on the same matter. So what I would say, in my view on the new water law, is that it is a starting point, to regulate the use of water, because as I was saying, the thing is that we have had a lot of regulations from different authorities, and sometimes you are like under the light from different authorities that are making audits, and so with this new law, at least the intention would be to have just one legal framework, but it is a starting point, and we still have to develop and see how the regulations of the law will be elaborated, because there are still important matters that need to be addressed, like, for example, the coefficients that will be part of the formula to calculate the fees of the use of water, which at this point we still don't have it. So at this point, we don't know how it will impact industries from an economic perspective, So it is very important to continue with that work.
And Ana, if I may, I think it is important to acknowledge that there's still the permits in most of our region on regards to wastewater treatment still permit to do wastewater discharge on the ground. And this is very risky in some of our areas, since the capacity of our land to really absorb and to treat these waters near clear water sources is still a risk in some of the areas. And I think this is bigger as our countries are developing in the metropolitan areas, and the rural areas would have still much more to learn from legislation and from this practice. So I think it is important to have this on the mind of GCs that are joining us and the audience that's hearing these experiences, to understand that regulations might not be fast enough for sustainable issues in the long term. And I think that that's important to observe. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. And actually, I mean, we're going to, of course, have this Q&A session at the end, but I think a question's come in that kind of ties in quite nicely to what you were saying. So if you don't mind, I might read it out now, and maybe you can respond to it, because I think it might kick off kind of the next part of our discussion quite nicely as well. So someone in the audience has asked, how do you think of environmental authorities can improve the processes to obtain the permits to operate in different countries in Central America? So this person who's listening in said he or she went to the experience of obtaining environmental permits to build a textile manufacturing facility in Costa Rica. And the company decided not to keep pursuing the project given the permits process and more than 18 months of going on, and the company still hadn't procured these permits, although they did everything they had to do to comply with the regulation. So it seems like a quite a lengthy, tricky process. So the question is there a breach between the law and business needs? Is there a breach between authorities' agility and business needs? What would you say to that?
Well, I think the question really summarized most of the impacts. I don't know if Maria Fernanda can provide better knowledge from all the Central American area, but I think in Costa Rica we are changing this regulation because it is most of it an obstacle right now to see the path and to see the length of the permits. But in some decision making, when companies switch countries, they find themselves with another experience, as happened in El Salvador some years ago, where the authorities came with an environmental tax for regards to water use that could come all the way up to $300,000 for a company. So I think it's better to understand this obstacle in this country, but if you switch to another country, you might find different obstacles. And I think Ligia and Maria Fernanda could answer better of their experience as private institutions and companies.
Yeah, I think Roberto is pointing out something very important, which is that actually the challenges that we may face in Costa Rica will be very different than with the ones we would deal in Guatemala or El Salvador. And you have, as an investor, you have to have that very clear. But what I have always thought about the environmental processes here in order to obtain permits is that we should move to a system in which we can categorize some of the activities and try to make them, to organize them in a way in which you can start construction and development, and you have a control once the activity is operating. I mean, of course, this places some risks, right? But I think that there are some activities, such as the one described by the speaker, that would not necessarily have a great impact on environment, and that if you put very important sanctions for the investors if they don't do things right, we could shorten the time length for obtaining a lot of permits. So it's trying to change the focus, and instead of having some like a previous process for authorizing, we're having something that approves on the way while they're already operating or they're already developing. So I think that's something that should be analyzed. Of course, it doesn't work for great projects like hydro, for instance, or wind power projects, but it does work for some other projects in which the footprint is not as large as other activities. I think that would be a solution, like for the Central American country in general.
And if I may, Anna, I think it's a great question. There definitely is a breach between the law and businesses. and I think one of the issues that we see, maybe as in-house counsel, is that the authorities in the different countries are looking at their space that they're responsible for, and so you have different needs, different permits that you have to obtain to start a new project and to keep working on a project. And sometimes those responsibilities overlap, and there's no clear guidance on what authority is the one that should take charge. So if you're a company that's looking to invest in Central America, you really face a maze of permits and authorities that you have to deal with. And that can impact the decision that you make as to in which country do you invest. You have a lot of conditions to be met, a lot of authorities to be that you have to interact with. We see a lot of countries doing work in simplifying and thinking about how to best do business in their countries. And sometimes their focus is more on how to get a company going if you want to start investing in that country, but there's not a lot of or as much as we would like input as to how do we comply with environmental legislation that you need in order to do business in that country. So that would be an action that the countries can take to simplify, to look into this and simplify what you need. As Maria Fernanda is saying, maybe there's a process where we can have permits prior to or authorizations prior to an inspection. Honduras has tried to do something like this with the new system for licenses that they displayed a couple of years ago, where you can request a license and obtain a provisional license for your project, and the authority can go and inspect what you're doing within a year and confirm that license or revoke that license. But I think there's still a lot of work to do into all the permits and all the authorizations that you need and all the authorities that you have to interact with. I think there's really not a single point of contact or the realization that a single point of contact or the simplifying of the work that you have to do would be good for business, while also maintaining the focus on compliance, which is what you need.
Great, thank you, Ligia. And I think this actually ties very nicely sort of into this second block of discussion that we wanted to have anyway in terms of legal limitations. So it really, it sounds to me like there are indeed quite a lot of legal limitations still that affect kind of both kind of combining, you know, taking into account, you know, both social, environmental impacts, but also business impacts. And so I don't know, maybe, I don't know, Maria Fernanda, do you want to maybe add a little bit more in terms of what legal limitations you see, maybe also in the renewable energy field, or?
Sure, of course. I would like to take a moment and reflect on this specific point that Ana is bringing up, and is regarding the limitations that we do have in Costa Rica right now. Just to explain a little bit of the facts, we have a law in Costa Rica stating that private generation can only take place for a 15% of all of the energy generation in the country. And that has a consequence, of course, because what we're perceiving right now is that when the pandemics hit us strongly, right, in 2020 and 2020, we as a country considered that the economics would fail, right, and there would be not necessarily a lot of increase in demand for energy. However, unfortunately, what we've seen is that the energy demand is spiking. So that's a sign, of course, that the economy is getting recovered and that there's a lot of new businesses in the country. And for those industries to come to Costa Rica and start making business here, they need not only enough energy, but accessible energy in terms of tariff. And if we have that 15% cap in our legislation, we're not able as private companies to pursue new renewable energy projects. And just to be clear, that 15% is strictly for energy power plants that are that use wind or solar or hydro, right? We're not talking about fuel. So I think that that's at least our main limitation in terms of the energy market. But I would like to bring another limitation, and actually regarding what we discussed first about the green bond issues, and that is that when you as a company decide on issuing a green bond, you have the obligation to take those proceeds from that issuance and dedicate that money to green projects, right? As signatories of the Green Bond Framework, we need to get that money and use it for CapEx or OpEx of the companies for these eligible green projects. So for instance, we chose four of the options that are being given by this Green Bond Framework, which are renewable energy efficiency, green or energy efficiency, green buildings, and clean transportation. So what I would say is that for more companies to decide on bringing a new bond in the region, it's especially important for countries to provide with the correct policies and regulations so that those specific activities are not only allowed, but also promoted with the corrective incentives, and that those regulations are clear as to obtain the targets that are being set when you decide upon getting involved in a green bond issuance.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. And I'm just keeping a little bit an eye on the time, and we've only got about 15 minutes left. So I know there might be a little bit more to be said about the legal limitations, but what I wanted to get to as well is sort of your own participation, either as a GC, as an in-house lawyer, or also lawyer in private practice. Sort of what influence do you have with law initiatives to ensure, better regulations towards sustainability? I think, Carolina, you already touched on this a little bit with this example of the water law, because you had this interesting experience in El Salvador where Congress for the first time included people from different sectors to provide comments. Maybe we can kind of circle around back to that a little bit, sort of in connection with what can you do? I'd quite like to hear a little bit more about that. I think that would be interesting.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Yes, well, this process was very interesting because, as you say, we were involved, but not just legal teams, also technical teams. Okay, so we were also working with different industries in the same room, and this was made, in these industries associations, because we were all aiming at the same purpose, was to provide comments that were reasonable, that could provide good input for Congress, but also considering sustainability of the operations. And I was really thinking that in this process, I saw that GCs from food industries and beverage industries were involved because they were like the right people to provide, from a legal perspective, their comments on what is really needed or what was needed for the law to work, and to provide comments that could be incorporated and to have a law that can be applied. So, and thinking about like the influence that we as lawyers can have on new regulations, what I will say is that we as lawyers, whether you are a general counsel or you're in the private practice or you work in a law firm or the public, sector, we are all called towards improving the rule of law, which at the end, it deals basically with two concepts, okay? It is that people should be ruled by the law and obey it. But the thing is that the law must be one that people is able to comply, you know? So the law must be known, and also it should be accessible. So what I was trying to say is that when it comes to sustainability and environment, it has been said that the rule of law is critical for sustainable development, okay? So for us in our countries where we have this challenge of over-regulation and finding, you know, contradictions in the law, we have a lot of authorities on the same matter. What I think it's important to get involved in the elaboration of the new laws or regulation whenever we have the possibility to do it, okay? And that is important too, so that you can identify what lawyer you have that is an expert in certain areas. You have a lawyer that is expert in waste management, or you have one in you know, like in water or wastewater, and also in your technical team too, and put it in the room and work on how you can improve that and provide those comments, okay? And take advantage of these spaces that you can find to provide those comments and make, you know, like your part. Because this takes me to another point, and how this is also an important exercise, because laws are changing, and we cannot, you know, we have to change also the way that we make business. We need to have clear rules both for the business to run, and also considering how we can make resources sustainable, okay? And so what you know, what I'm trying to say, and I think the message for me is that we also have to think not only on the companies or industries' needs and views, but you have also to consider those from your neighboring communities. And that is something that we are looking how this is being incorporated into law. And one of the examples that I like, you know, to say is that in the new water law, we have the process to obtain authorizations to use the water, okay, which is essential for the operation of a company. So in the process to obtain that authorization, you will have to make public your request, so that any person who feels that can be affected with that use can make up an opposition. And as a result of that opposition from any person that may be affected from the community, or, you know, your process can be stopped or denied. And although you will have also the possibility to challenge that resolution, but at the end, I think that the message is that this is why it is important that you start thinking on how to make the resources sustainable for everybody, okay? Because you don't want to also get into that point when you're in the process of an authorization, which is critical for your operation, and that you have this risk of an opposition. So you better have to know what are the needs of your communities before that, and work that, okay? So I think that's one of the things that I will say that we need to change, and that's why it is important also to get involved into regulations and law, you know, like elaborations too.
LIGIA, I can see you nodding away. What's your view on this, sort of ensuring both, you know, sustainability as well as sustainable business and business growth?
I think it's important to recognize that not all of the countries in Central America provide those spaces to really participate and give your opinion in a bill. So it's really important to take advantage of the spaces that you have, be it through a call from Congress or the participants to look at the drafts, or through any industrial association that your company is a part of. This is a great opportunity to really understand what the lawmakers are also saying. You have environmental activists and communities also giving their opinion. In the end, what you want is what Carolina is saying, a law that makes sense, and that is easy to, if I can say, easy to comply with. But I think this also ties to Roberto's comment a bit before, that we need to see the region as a unit. And that is both us as in-house counsel or lawyers, and also the authorities. We need to understand that as we move forward with better legislation or better regulation, we also need to understand that some of these decisions require investment by the companies. So you also have to keep in your line of sight the costs of that. And if you're drafting a new legislation that severely impacts the requirements, and that requires a new investment, how will that impact your country's ability to compete with others? So if we can raise our hands and say, this is great that we want to have a better legislation, but should we do this in such a big change, or can we have stages where that makes sense? There are some issues that you can't. You really have to go through the change immediately, but it's good and it's needed that we provide that line of sight to the authorities when they're drafting new laws.
Thank you, Ligia. And just because you sort of mentioned that there's this need to see the region as a whole and as a unit, there was actually another question that came up from the audience as well. Someone says, it has always struck me the lack of real cooperation between the countries in Central America. We are a small region with complicated frameworks in each country, a complicated scenario for external investors that are looking for a holistic approach in the region. So from your perspective, is there a way via SICA or any other entity or even the country's goodwill to harmonize these regulations? Anyone, what's your thought on that?
I think the question is very good, and it pointed out an institution as SICA. We have used for several years the inspector manual for environmental audits from SICA that we will gladly share with the audience today after the session. And I think it's a good example of how SICA performed an environmental manual that should be used for the other topics, since as Ligia and Maria Fernanda pointed out, and Carolina was very effective in explaining the participation process. Not all countries are the best example, although they have the greener label. And I think as a Costa Rican, I might criticize my own regulation on regards to where is the money going on regards to the water regulations, because you have water treatment standards, water taxes for the water treatment parameters, but that money is not going back to enforce the aqueducts, to enforce the water capacity. And I think if El Salvador is copying now the reuse water decree to improve it, or is Guatemala hire our fiscal ambiental, our environmental prosecutor to oversee a new environmental court or a new Central America way to pursue environmental crimes. I think you have to take the best of the experience, but acknowledge the lessons. And I think we as a region should unite in this sense, and unite in the possibility that our standards would be the same, and that our standards will be guided not only from the rich experience, but only for the lessons of lack of really complying at the end with environmental rulings at our environmental courts, with the enforcing of these environmental regulations for water, and how this water tax is being used. And we should require the governments to really use it in the water sources and not use it as a commodity to have a small money box where you can take green regulations and use it for the lack of capacity of the governments to perform. So I think there's much to learn, but I think there's some steps that we can go forward.
Thank you, Roberto. And actually, in the meantime, another question has come in, and I think we do have enough time to maybe address this one as well. So I'm going to read it out. It was how to approach the different stakeholders we have in environmental matters. So community, lawmakers, authorities. This person has seen that even though you comply with national laws, you have local, so municipality regulations that overlap and then maybe contradict these federal laws. So, and then on top of that, you have pressure from the communities that try to push companies to obtain sources. So how to approach all of that, in your opinion?
Well, maybe I can participate in this question. In fact, it's very difficult and very challenging. We're talking about many stakeholders that participate in these fronts. And maybe what I would say is that the most important thing is to anticipate. So try to be involved when the policy or the regulation in a local scheme is being thought, and they open those spaces for public participation. So because when the regulation is already enacted, I mean, there's less to be able to do, right? I think we have to anticipate and try to participate in the correct stage. And if we come up with a local regulation that is evidently against national regulation, then we should raise our hands and make use of the powerful tools that we have, right? I think that sometimes as legal departments in companies, we underestimate the ability that we have impact in these regulations, and we have to really embrace that power because we know what is it, what's the pain that we have. We have the time, we have the economical resources, and the passion for pushing regulations that do make sense, right?
Go for it, Ligia. We have a couple of minutes, so go for it.
If I can add, I think this is something that you have to incorporate as a part of the projects. You have to have a plan to reach out to the different to identify and reach out to the different stakeholders to try to understand what their objectives might be. We recently had a good example in Costa Rica. We had a project, a big project for the company, which was carried out in a year and a half or something like that. And within the project, we had the team engaged in a plan to communicate and keep reaching out to the different stakeholders. Each one of them had very different expectations from the company. And you had to understand what you could commit to and what you couldn't, because sometimes your stakeholders' expectations would exceed what you can do, what you're required to do. But in the end, that constant communication, not only from the law department, from the project managers, from the people on the ground, is what allowed us to have a successful project in that region of Costa Rica.
Thank you, Ligia. And Carolina, I can see you put your hand up. Do you have any final comments?
Well, yes, only for this question, what I will say that when you are in countries like ours, where you have so many regulations, local, municipal, etc., it's always a good exercise that you keep like your permits and obligations matrix up to date, and that you make sure that you have all your permits in place, that you are complying with all your obligations, because in practice, what we have seen is that it is better to have like this culture, that to prevent any challenges from a judge, from the authorities, and be prepared instead of working on it when you are already in a process. Okay, so I think that that's like a good practice, just to keep that, and that you have someone that can update that constantly. Those like matrix, like a chart with all your permits and your obligations and the regulation that applies to your business.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I think, unfortunately, we've come to an end. Time has run out, but I really thank, obviously, all our audience for sticking with us all this time. I hope you found it a really useful discussion. Thank you to Arias, obviously our sponsors, for making it happen, and LIGIA, Maria Fernanda, thank you so much for your really valuable perspectives on this topic. It's a really important topic. I think it will remain a very important topic in the future. I'm sure we'll have another few follow-up sessions on similar themes, and so tune in again next time, and thank you very much.